and welcome to Retech, and today we're going to discuss MIDI. MIDI's been around for quite a while, but it's quite an important milestone in computer technology, and it's also a very important system for a lot of musicians, because without it we wouldn't have a lot of the music we've come to know and love today. Now, MIDI started out quite a while ago. It was as early as 1981, and it was Dave Smith and Chet Wood who published their paper of that year about an interface that would allow you to connect keyboards, instruments and so on to a computer system. And it was originally kind of based on a Roland synthesizer or a Roland keyboard. And what they came up with was a system that would enable you to control or record the keystrokes of, let's say, a keyboard on a computer system itself. And that was a big leap forward, because there was no real set standard before then. The standard was non-existent. They didn't have anything remotely that you could actually call a musical interface standard, and that was causing problems. And as you can understand, people were kind of hankering after a standard that they could use with every manufacturer of keyboard or instrument or drum machine and so on. But until that point, you couldn't, say, mix a Yamaha system with a Roland system or a Korg system and so on, because they were completely incompatible with each other. And that was causing headaches throughout the industry as well. And plus, the equipment was very, very expensive, and it was way out of the league of hobbyists. So what they did was introduce an interface that would allow professionals and hobbyists to create music electronically, record it, play it back and edit it, which was the key feature of MIDI. Now, the file format that a MIDI system or a MIDI keyboard might use is not the same as, you know, an audio recording. Now, a lot of people kind of confuse a MIDI file with audio files that you can actually hear and play back and so on. But without having a MIDI instrument attached to a MIDI system or a computer, then it's just basically a recording of the key presses, the keystrokes and the attack and delay, and it also records the velocity and everything associated with playing an instrument. Now, that file on its own won't produce any sounds, so it only works when it's played back through a MIDI system, and at the time you played it back through your keyboard. And the instrument itself that was being used to, you know, program the song, as it were, or to enter the song, you know, play the song, didn't really matter to MIDI. MIDI was just sending the information back to the device to play whatever instrument that it was assigned to at the time. So if you played it on a piano and you wanted to play it back as an accordion or a harpsichord or even a drum beat, it would record, it would rather play that recording as those sounds in those pitches. Because remember, your piano and your drums and your harpsichord and whatever you were using on that keyboard is just a frequency. You know, so it's the same as, you know, frequencies that you use in SID chips and sound chips and so on. That's all your digital piano or keyboard really was. And so you could play it back as a piano piece, and it would sound exactly how you kind of wrote it. Or you could play it back as an oboe or a cello or whatever instrument that your keyboard or your MIDI device could actually play it as. So you could kind of chop and change and invent new ways of your music being kind of listened to and the way it sounded. So that was a fantastic leap. And MIDI was quite a simple system, because basically it was a system of 7 bits. Now, it may sound a bit odd when you think of, well, they had 8-bit computers out there, but it was technically a 7-bit audio or 7-bit data file that it was transmitting and receiving. The first bit was the header. It told it whether it was data and so on. The next 7 was the actual data that was being sent, and it also had a header and a footer, so it knew when it started and knew when it finished. So it was sending it as a 10-bit packet. So it wasn't memory intensive, it wasn't, you know, vastly over bloated. Nothing really was back then, to be honest. And it was designed around computers of the kind of 1 megahertz capacity, because that was sort of the average processor capacity or speed back then. And the whole system was geared around the machines of the time. So if you had a MIDI device plugged into a Commodore 64 via a MIDI controller, or a MIDI interface rather, it would happily record and play back your symphony that you programmed on your keyboard. So it was a very, very good way of manipulating the information from your keyboard and resending it back. And that goes for any other MIDI device, whether it was a drum machine or whatever you were using. Now, the whole system really wasn't kind of finalized and standardized until 1983, and that system really stayed standardized all the way through to the new generation of MIDI, which was only finalized in 2020. So it had a fantastic run, and even then the next generation of MIDI is able to be backwards compatible with its previous version, and that's fantastic. That's something that really was born out of being a system that could be used across hardware and across systems and across instruments. So you probably guess what MIDI stands for. MIDI is an acronym for Musical Instrument Data Interface, and it kind of fits it really well. And it's a standard that we use even today, even under USB control with our modern PCs. The really groundbreaking things about MIDI is it kind of arrived at the dawn of the home computer, as we said. It was really kind of designed around a 1 megahertz processor. So that fitted in really well when you consider that most computers at the time were running 6502s or Z80s, home computers, and they were averaging around the 1 megahertz in kind of raw processing speed. And that was a game changer. That allowed people to plug these devices, MIDI devices, into home computers, and that allowed hobbyists to start making music. Because prior to that, when MIDI kind of was first launched into the market, it was more professional. It was all about professional music making, studios and so on. And once it was out there with the home computers, that really moved the game on. And you know, we still use it. And I know you're going to say that, well, we've kind of moved on to digital audio workshop DAWs, but most DAWs are still based around the MIDI systems and the MIDI interface. And it's, you know, you could plug an old 1980s, mid to late 1980s keyboard into a modern DAW with a USB converter on there, and it wouldn't know any difference. It would sit quite happily, allowing you to compose your music. So it wasn't until 2020, where MIDI 2.0 is coming about, that you know, we're kind of moving on a little bit with MIDI. But really, MIDI with its 7-bit data packet has been more than enough for most people over the last 40 years almost, and it's kind of stood the test of time. So MIDI is a very, very good format. You've got a single cable, a MIDI interface, a MIDI cable, which will hold 16 channels, and they're labeled 0 to 15, not 1 to 16. And each device that you add on to your computer as a MIDI chain you can individually record from each of those devices depending on the channel that they're set at. So your MIDI controller, or maybe your computer at the time that you're using, can actually record from different instruments being played at the same time. So you can lay your tracks down as well as combine instruments, which is great, because if you've got let's say a drum machine playing and a keyboard, and then you can lay a second track down with extra instrumentation that you want to put in there, or extra notes, or maybe you want to do a fill-in bit and so on, you can actually add that in there as you go. So MIDI is very versatile, and MIDI is versatile mainly because of the computer systems for the home that were around at the time, and many of these computer systems were starting to be used as professional units, and the Atari ST is one of them. The Atari ST became one of my favorite computers, but at the time it was more Amiga, because the Amiga kind of took the shine on it if you looked at it as a graphical machine or a games playing machine, whereas the Atari ST, although very capable in both areas, didn't quite have the shine and the polish of the Amiga. But as time's gone on, the Atari ST's become more of a useful tool, especially for production in music, and it still holds up very, very well today. And as I kind of alluded to in some of my other videos, that the Atari ST combined with a mid-80s, early 90s MIDI keyboard with its built-in amp and built-in music range, built-in drum kits, all those kind of things that you get in a decent MIDI keyboard of the time, comes into its own, because the Atari ST, used as a MIDI device with a decent bit of software on, like Sonos or whatever you're using, the timing of the Atari ST is absolutely spot on with this kind of equipment. The latency of the Atari ST, when you're using a single keyboard or maybe that and a drum machine, is absolutely immaculate. You really can't better it. Now, the modern DAWs, digital audio workshops, have massive amounts of latency. Even if you use a modern sound card, a modern 24-bit system, stuff your computer full of as much memory as you can to compensate for any latency that might be memory related, use the best quality USB cables, again to cut down on latency and so on, you're still getting ever so slight latency even on the best systems. Now, you don't get that with a hardware based system like a hardware MIDI device with its built-in amp, so you can actually monitor what you're playing while you're playing it, and all the computer is doing is recording. It's not playing it back through while you're playing it, so you don't get that built-in delay that you get on modern MIDI keyboards and modern MIDI software. And if you look throughout the internet, there are threads upon threads. It doesn't matter which DAW you're using, of why am I getting so much latency, why am I getting so much delay, and so on. And there's lots of fixes, but it starts getting expensive. Now, today we're going to look at how to set up a basic Atari computer with a basic MIDI system, and just to show you how simple it is and how quick it is to get yourself into recording your own music, your own tunes, your own intros for podcasts, or whatever you want to do on a classic machine with classic hardware. So first of all, before we even do any of that, we're going to just quickly refurbish an Atari ST. I've quite a little bit of a collection of Atari STs because they are useful for everything that I want to do with classic machines, basically. And So we do take an Atari ST like this, which is very yellowed in places, needs a lot of TLC, a little bit of restoration, but underneath it's a decent machine. Upgrade the memory just to give us that little bit of extra performance. And when you think about performance, you're talking about meg. An extra meg, extra half meg would even do it. And putting it inside of an Atari ST does improve things dramatically, especially on length of recordings you can do and so on. But it's a meg, it's not a gig, it's not, you know, a terabyte of storage, it's not a gig's worth of memory or more. It's an Atari ST, which we're going to shove in a little bit of extra memory on a 520, and then we're just going to get it going and get it plugged in. So that's what we're going to do, but I'm going to just show you quickly how this machine and the same style of machine is easy to refurbish, and then we're going to move on to having a look how to set up a keyboard and also how to record from an Atari ST, and also how to do it quite cheaply as well, because some of the sequencing software is getting hard to come by. Some of the sequencing software needs dongles for these machines, but there are alternatives which work just as well for, you know, if you just want to use it for basic recording and basic laying down of a couple of MIDI tracks, which, to be honest, most people would be happy doing that. So let's take a look. So the first thing you need to do is clean the machine, and try not to spray it like some people do on some of these restoration videos with the machine inside and all the electronics, because it'll get through the vents and ruin it. So I'll clean it with a little bit of a bleach solution, because we are going to make sure the case is 100% clean before we paint, because we don't want to spoil our finish. And then just gently wipe anything away from the surface of the machine as possible. Take your time on this. It can take a good half hour or more to make sure the machine is nice and clean. Then once you've finished, all you need to do is take a little sanding block, a super fine sanding block, and start preparing the surface of the plastic. You're not sanding it away, you're preparing the surface by using a block. And what you need to do is just keep on going nice and gently over the entire plastic case until you get a really even finish. And what you'll find is that the colour, or the original colour, will start to come through a little bit on the case, which is where you want to be. It's not going to come through entirely on one of these cases, but it's going to come through, and you'll get an idea of what the finished item is going to be. All you need to do is just take your time, don't rush, and make sure that, you know, every little part of the case is dealt with and you haven't missed anything before you come to the next part. Okay, so we have grey plastic primer, which is automotive product here, and what we're going to use this is put it on the case itself. Okay, so when you do it, it's light coats, and we're going to finish that with Painter's Touch, which is a stone grey matte paint, and that's the closest we're going to get to the original Atari ST colour. So all you're going to do is apply the grey primer first in very light coats, 2 to 3 very light coats. You're not making a really heavy coat of this because it's just a bonding agent. Okay, so once you've done that, you're going to apply the top coat. Again, very light coats. You're not trying to flood the machine with paint, you're trying to give it the colour. Okay, and we have one finished 520 STFM, which was done with automotive paint. And you know what, it's not a million miles away. In fact, I'd be very happy with that if that was my ST. And you can see the one that I did the other day, using a professional mix paint. This isn't actually that far away, and in fact they're both very, very good matches. You wouldn't even know if you just looked at them, and this machine looks very, very smart and incredibly young in comparison to this or this. And that's what it's all about. It's actually restoring these machines and then keeping them for future use. And with it being painted, as I said with the other one, it's going to stop the degradation of the plastics, and it's going to last a lot longer. So here we have a MIDI setup. It's probably not where you're going to be starting off at, because it's got quite a few different items plugged into a computer, and it also is used for both classic and modern machines. So I have keyboards linked to a DAW and keyboards linked to the MIDI controller via the Atari ST. So today we're really going to focus on what's connected through to the ST. Okay, so you'll notice we have the refurbished Atari ST here, and it's nicely done. It's all been painted up and it looks quite nice. But you'll also notice that there's a controller or a mixer on the top. Now, that's nothing to do with today. It will be done on a later program to show you how that actually works. So today we're just going to concentrate on the Atari and the keyboards themselves. So we have Yamaha PSR 400, which is one of my favourite keyboards. It's got the nicest sounding piano out of nearly all of the keyboards I've ever tried. And we also have the Yamaha PSR 50 attached to the top, which is just a basic keyboard with a number of different instruments, but it's the PSR 400 we're going to concentrate on. This keyboard is linked to quite a number of instruments. I think there's about 100 instruments on it, plus a drum kit built in, and also pitch changer wheel and a lot of other stuff. You can actually record directly to this keyboard. You don't even need the MIDI controller or the MIDI computer as well, but you can't lay down separate tracks on top of each other, which you can with a MIDI system or a sequencer system. So also, you've probably noticed we have a drum machine which is also attached to the ST, but we're going to concentrate on just the 400 on its own, as if you were going to pop in a 400 to start off with to an Atari ST or any similar MIDI keyboard. Now, just a quick run through. This is for a modern DAW or a modern digital audio workshop. It's a 24-bit USB sound adapter for MIDI and also for line-in microphones, etc. And it's something you really would need on a modern machine, because, as we mentioned before, there are delays and there are feedback loops and there are kind of timing issues that you get with modern DAWs, which, you know, external sound systems like this sort out to a greater extent. But again, we'll cover that in a later episode. And we've also got an Oxygen 2 MIDI keyboard. Now, the difference between the Oxygen 2 MIDI keyboard and your Yamaha, or even the 400 or the 50 there, or any other 1980s to mid-1990s style MIDI keyboard, is these have built-in amps, built-in speakers, so you can monitor what you're playing directly. There's no need to, you know, have a separate sound system and choose your instruments via software to get a feedback to monitor what you're doing. And that's where the delays come in. With these, it's instant. There's no delays. There's no timing issues. What you play is what you record, and what you record is what you hear. Now, to do that, you'll probably even notice, even at the back of it, there's another Yamaha 200 keyboard, which is something I'm working on to refurbish because it's quite an old model. But this is a MIDI setup you could do yourself. Now, to connect a Yamaha keyboard or any other keyboard, single keyboard, to an Atari ST, the first thing you're going to have to get is MIDI cables. MIDI cables here, and they are shielded. They are designed for MIDI instruments only, and the longer the cable, the better quality is probably the easiest way of explaining it, because thinner cables like these are okay for short meter lengths, but anything over that, you're really going to need more expensive high quality cables, which is what I have got plugged in the back of these, as you can see by the probably by the thickness of the cable in comparison to these. So you're going to need two, and you're going to need two because each keyboard is, well, most keyboards have three ports. They have a MIDI in, a MIDI out, and MIDI through, but we're going to concentrate on MIDI in and MIDI out. To connect a keyboard to a computer such as the ST, you're going to have to connect it through its alternative MIDI port. So the MIDI out from your keyboard or your drum machine or whatever has to go into the MIDI in on the computer, and vice versa. So your MIDI in goes through to the MIDI out on the Atari or whichever MIDI computer that you're using. So that enables it to send the signals. Again, you've got 7-bit data on a 10-bit packet being sent backwards and forwards between the two machines. So that's how it works. You have basically send and receive, and if you cross them over or do, plug them into the wrong way round, the wrong orientation, it just won't work. You won't be sending or receiving anything that makes any sense to either machine. The next thing you got to do is try and choose your system, okay, your software. Now today I'm going to be using Sonos, which is quite a good sequencer. It's very easy to use, it's very intuitive, especially for its time, and it makes a lot of sense, but it's very hard to come by. And then most of these MIDI sequencer packages for the Atari also come with a dongle, a plug-in dongle, which plugs in on the side of the machine, and without that they won't work. They just won't run the software, they won't record, they are basically going to what's basically demo mode. So they become effectively just a demo of the original software if you don't have the dongle. Now if you get something like Sonos, it will probably come on two discs, a program disc, which this one's for the 520 and 1040 ST, but not the STEs. It'll only run on the base model or the basic original ST, and whether that's a 520 or 1040, that's fine, but you may need to add in a little bit of extra memory if you've got a basic 520 ST. The next disc you will get with it is an event editor, and also you may get some demos. So once you've composed something, it will add in that final flair through its inbuilt editor on here. So you've got two discs covering the entire range of features that you can do with one of these MIDI sequencing or sequencing packages. Now they are quite rare and quite hard to get hold of now, and you might think, well, it's going to struggle even if I get an ST and I refurbish it and repaint it so it looks like this, or retro bright it, or whatever you're going to do to it, and you might struggle to find the software to do this sequencing with. But Cubase Lite is almost freely available, and most retro enthusiasts and most retro stores that cater for these retro machines, which I will put a link at the bottom so you can, if you're struggling, you can try and find it through that. We'll be able to supply you with a copy of that. It's quite a good little package. It allows you to lay down multiple tracks. It has a few instruments already built into the package, so you can have them in addition to the instruments on your keyboard, and it will do most of the things you want to do because it's a 16-track sequencer. So 16 tracks is generally enough for most people. The other one is an edit or SMTPE track editor, and now this is freely available. You can get this anywhere. You can download it from a website, you can get it from one of the retro companies that are out there, and they will supply it on a disc, and again a link at the bottom, just so if you're struggling to find it or download it, you can get it directly from the people listed in the bottom of this link in the window below. So again, this one's quite good because it comes with quite a number of instruments that you can use, quite a number of accessories, things that you would probably have to pay for on a modern DAW, which come with it on one single floppy. Now, one of the major stumbling blocks for people is the monitor. The monitor on the Atari ST for most sequences need to be the high-res, which is a monochrome high-res monitor. And if you've got a HDMI adapter or a standard TV, or even a lower medium res color monitor, well, it's not going to do it, unfortunately. You need a high-res monitor specifically designed for displaying those high-res graphics on an Atari ST. There is a workaround, however, and that's a monochrome emulator for the Atari ST, which will get you by. It will convert a color system into a monochrome high-res monitor. So it will get you by. It will allow you to use the software until you can find a high-res monitor. It's not 100% brilliant. Some of the the characters are very compressed on it because it's obviously doing a compression to make it work, but it can work and it will work if you couldn't find any alternative, so it's worth a try. Again, link at the bottom. Now, one other option is to have an Atari ST mono VGA cable like this. Now, they're relatively expensive for what they are, but they're very small volume, so the provider of these probably doesn't make an awful lot of money on them in such small volume, so it's actually a fair deal. It's worth getting. And what it will do, it will allow your standard flat panel VGA monitor to work in high res on an Atari ST, and it's a great hardware fix. So what I'll do is when we actually go into the software, you will find that the video will basically cut from a flickery CRT, which is only really there so you can see what's going on really and how it's all set up, because it will be then put into a flat panel monitor just so you can see the image a lot better, okay, while things are being done. So that is your basic setup. Your basic setup would be one keyboard, one computer, one bit of software, one monitor. And it's very simple. It will probably take you 5 minutes to plug it all together. And then you can make your compositions as you see fit once you've switched the machine on, and it's very quick. Obviously, especially if you're using disc-based Sonos, etc., you can put it on a firmware alternative, flash card, an SD drive or something similar, which will make it even quicker. But to be honest, it's quite quick as it is. It only takes 20 seconds or so to install the disc and run it. So let's have a quick look and see what it's like in action. Okay, so we're just powering on the machine. You've got the disc in the drive, the dongle in the machine, and you've got a high-res monitor here, which will appear to be flickering because it's against the 60 Hertz camera, so you will see the flickering. So that's why we're going to swap over to an LCD panel once we show you how quick and easy it is to get this software running. So it's just the usual: click on your floppy disk, click on your program, and then it takes about 20 seconds or so to install the program, and then that's it, up and running. One other thing about using this cable is that you'll see has a audio jack on it. Now you do need that because most of these sequences use the audio output from the ST through the monitor for your metronome, for your timekeeping, okay? So it's always worth plugging in a set of speakers if you want to hear your metronome and your timekeeping and so on the machine. There you go, it's up and running before I've even finished talking about this. So that's how quick it is to get started. And the basics is you have your sequence here. So if you have sequence 1, you've got your tracks down here, and then all you do is record to your tracks to build up whatever you're building up, and then that's it. The rest of the options include things like editing, quantizing, changing the speed of your composition, even changing the pitch, and also adding in extra routines such as drums or extra keyboards and so on, or anything else that you would really want to do to make your new piece of music stand out. So let's take a quick look. Okay, so if I start off a track and record it, what we're going to do is just going to start off. You'll hear the metronome in the background. Just don't really need to take much notice of that because I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to play something to show you how this actually works. Now if we just play it back by pressing play, it's actually not going to come from the computer itself, it's going to come from the MIDI keyboard, which is very different to a modern DAW, which all comes from the PC. And now all we need to do, if you want to change things up without actually touching the computer itself, we'll change the actual instrument again and we'll add in a little bit of dual voice, and then we'll start again. And this is how it was intended to be listened to and written. Okay, so you can see without actually adding in extra MIDI tracks, you can get different sounds out of the same combination of keys by actually just using the keyboard itself. But whatever you do on his is recorded on the Atari ST. So that's how this works. Now if you wanted to lay another track down underneath that, all you need to do is activate a second track and it will play the first and then you add in the second. So I want to add in the second track now, and then I hit record. I'll use a high note so you can hear it. And as soon as your length of your track finishes, then the actual music stops and that's the end of your recording on that track. So when you play that back, you should hear the high notes at the top just squealing away. And just to give you an idea of how this works, so if I play it back completely, okay, there's just one level. There you go. And then you can hear the high pitched in the background. So if we want to do that properly, we can add in some extra notes just to fill it out. Okay, so that's how it works. So if we just do something different, like let's change the piano. So again, we'll just hit record, redo the same track. Okay, so how MIDI works is basically you do the keyboard, the controller up here, which is the Atari ST, and then anything you play on here gets transmitted to the Atari ST in 10-bit segments, so start and finish in a 7-bit data file. And then what we can do, we can just alter the instrument. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to play a quick track, and then we're just going to see how it works. So we're just going to record a track. MIDI on a classic computer like an Atari ST is a fantastic device. This was just a look into how to set it up and how it would actually work and what you would really need to set a simple MIDI system up. You can add things in later as you go, and we're going to cover setting the channels and so on for different devices as we move along this little mini series, okay? But we're also going to look at the modern side of it, the DAW side of it, the USB controller side of it, because once we start delving into that, you will be able to see what a lot of people mean by the timing issue, the latency issue, the extra hardware you need. And is it something that, you know, if you wanted just to lay down a couple of tracks and add in a little bit of bass line and add in a few drum sounds and just to get a nice professional sounding piece of music going, do you really need to spend all of the money on a modern MIDI keyboard, on a modern MIDI capable sound system or sound card, external or otherwise? Do you really need to add in all of your external mixing ports? Do you need to do all of this just to have a bit of fun and to lay down a few tracks? Now, that's what we're going to cover next issue. So I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the MIDI system, how it came about, how it was developed, and also how to set it up on a classic machine such as an Atari ST. Okay, so thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe and I hope you'll join me on the next episode. So thank you, and I'll see you soon.